You got it, Lauren.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is State Representative Lauren Carson, and I want to welcome you to a meeting of the Aquidneck Island Climate Caucus. The Aquidneck Island Climate Caucus was an idea of mine and Representative Terri, who's on this call. She represents Portsmouth and Middletown. And about 18 months ago, we got the idea to put together a loose group of Aquidneck Islanders because we know it's such an important issue for Aquidneck Island. And we've met over the last 18 months, maybe we've met about 8 or 9 times. COVID somewhat interrupted us, but then we pushed our meetings online. I want to let you know that we are recording this and it will be made available on our websites, on Facebook, and in mailings if anybody wants to see it later. The Aquidneck Island Climate Caucus has a few meetings lined up through the spring. I just want to say that our next meeting will be in February and it will be on the bonds because, as you know, we're having a special election in March, on March 2nd, and Rhode Islanders will be voting on a green bond. So that will be our next Climate Caucus meeting, and you'll hear about that. For folks that are not on our mailing list, if you look in the chat box, there's our email address, and you're more than welcome to put a note in there, and we will add you to our email address, our mailing list. And we really only email you when we have a meeting to announce. So we have a long list of questions that have been submitted by some of the viewers this evening, and we're thrilled to have the senator with us. So I'm going to turn this over to Rep. Ruggiero of Jamestown, who's going to make a few remarks about the senator.
Well, actually, I think Terri was.
Oh, Terri's next. Yes, Terri's next.
Senator, but I just want to say greetings and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We appreciate your advocacy in the community, and we're delighted that Senator Whitehouse has joined us. So, Rep. Cortvriend.
Yes, thank you. And just for a little background that I emailed many of you this, I just wanted to let you know that we're so happy to have the senator, and some of his duties as our senator is he serves in the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, where we all know that he's been such an advocate for the environment and climate change. And now that we have a new administration in, we're very excited to hear from him tonight about what that means. And the senator also serves on the Finance Committee, the Budget Committee, and the Judiciary Committees. And so without further ado, I'll let Senator Sheldon Whitehouse tell us himself what he thinks the highlights are going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. What a treat it is to be with everybody. And I want to express my particular joy and pride at being here with Ruggiero and Terri Cortvriend and Lauren Carson, who are 3 climate powerhouses in our state General Assembly. And the report from Washington is actually pretty darn good. We're rid of Trump and all of his ghastly anti-environment, climate denying nonsense. And his administration, it was just appalling what they were up to. So it couldn't be a better shift in the executive branch. And as I think many of you know, between when he was vice president and now, Joe Biden has really awakened on climate issues. And he and his administration are telling every single one of their cabinet officials, even ones who are not immediately involved in climate and energy issues, that they need to look for every way that they can to make climate a priority in the way they do their business. So we've had this wonderful shift in the executive branch. And then in Congress, we had Georgia. Who could imagine? We're so happy that Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff won their races. I was down in Georgia for 2 multi-day trips, trying to organize along the coasts where sea level rise is a worse issue than it is for us because we've got rocky shores and they're just that long. They don't, let's put it this way, they don't call it the low country for nothing down in Georgia. And it was really interesting what good feedback and how important ocean sea level rise climate was as an issue along that coast. So I think both Ossoff and Warnock are coming in with pretty strong motivation to get something good done there as well. And of course, Nancy Pelosi still controls the House, and she's the one who's actually done a real climate bill, cap and trade, back during the Obama administration. So I think we're teed up pretty darn well. the larger political context is that when I first got to the Senate, climate was a pretty bipartisan issue. There were 4 or 5 different bipartisan big climate bills kicking around. The Republican nominee for president was John McCain, and he ran on a good climate platform. And then came Citizens United, January of 2010. They got unlimited political hardware to go batter the Republican Party with, and they completely eliminated dissent on climate in the Republican Party. And they created this artificial barrier that looks like partisanship, but is actually just fossil fuel pressure and nobody else's counter pressure. And one of the things that I've been doing to try to bust that up has been to go after the US Chamber of Commerce. Totally unlike our chambers of commerce. It is a climate denying monster that was rated by Influence Map as one of the worst 2 climate obstructors in America in a virtual tie. And we've been working with a lot of the companies that are members of theirs to ask them to explain why they're giving money to a worst climate obstructor in America and supporting it. Anyway, all of that has blown up. And last week, the US Chamber of Commerce announced that it would support big climate action as long as it was market-based, which is a huge turnabout for them and a big signal of, I think, a shift in the political environment that is taking place. There are probably 10 of my Republican colleagues in the Senate who I talk to pretty regularly about climate change, and they just never saw a pathway to doing anything. They were like talking to prisoners about escape, they'd talk about escape, but they didn't want to run at the wire. And you had to tell, we had to have secret conversations so that Warden McConnell wouldn't find out and all that kind of stuff. So all that is breaking up and we have a lot of opportunity. And I guess that's what I'll close with and then go to your questions. We really have a great moment of opportunity and we need to seize it and be really strong.
Thank you, Senator. I agree. We all agree. We're, first of all, so happy for the work that you're doing on our behalf in Washington. And I think we're all thrilled to finally have a president who acknowledges that the climate crisis is real and believes in science. So what we have are about 9 to 10 questions from many of our constituents that have emailed us for this conversation. So let's get into it. Transportation accounts for about 35% of the greenhouse emissions in this state, the greenhouse gas emissions. And Rhode Island recently joined the Transportation Mobility Plan Initiative program. We filed a plan with investments and policies to support a clean transportation future. And I must say, it was encouraging to hear nominee Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg talk about transportation and climate crisis being central to the Biden administration. So I think you're going to have a lot of fun now with some of these folks coming in. Our first question comes from Colleen Quinn in Middletown, and she'd ask you to just comment on the need for TCI and what can we expect from the federal government in terms of support.
Well, first of all, TCI is a really good thing for Rhode Island to have done and to have gathered together with Massachusetts and Connecticut so we don't have border issues. We're a bigger footprint for it. And I'm really proud of Governor Raimondo for her role in all of that. It's an additional way of putting a price on carbon and offsetting the huge subsidy that fossil fuel enjoys in this country. So it's a good step as a symbol nationally as well. What the Biden administration tells us is that the first bill that they want to do, and if they have to, will do it using budget reconciliation, which is the Senate method that allows you to pass a bill with a simple majority that can't be filibustered. And the first one is obviously going to be the COVID response to finish the job that the Republicans wouldn't let us do the last time we got a bill passed. But the next big one after that is going to be a big infrastructure bill with a big climate infrastructure piece to it. And even back in the bad old days of Republican control of the Senate, we got a highway bill passed that had a big electronic vehicle infrastructure piece in it. For places like Rhode Island, it had a big coastal infrastructure repair and preparation piece in it. It had the first climate title ever in a highway bill. So we have big, big, big opportunities on transportation in the next, in bill number 2. And then obviously, when we get around to doing the precise climate bill, the big one, we will be looking at even more ways to get transportation encouraged and off of carbon.
Well, that's great. And just to follow up on that, because you're right, Governor Raimondo, as well as Massachusetts, Connecticut, and the mayor of DC have all committed to TCI. Hank Webster in West Greenwich wants to ask about, there are companies like National Grid, BP, and Bank of America who are also supporting the TCI initiative. Do you think there's an opportunity with this new Biden administration that maybe Congress could enact something nationwide? Is there room with some of your Republican colleagues?
I think there is, but we're going to need to work through what that looks like. And we're going to need to test what the proposal is to make sure that it really does steer towards 1.5 degrees. You know, there's only one grade on this exam, and that's the grade that nature will give us as to whether we've obeyed her laws of physics and chemistry and biology. And that's 1.5 degrees, basically. That's the benchmark for it. So we need to make sure it does the job, and whether it's a price on carbon, or whether it's renewable energy standards, or whether it's another run at cap and trade, there are a whole variety of different ways to go after this. You may want to do it slightly differently, sector by sector, and we have to leave ourselves a little bit of flexibility, as you all know, as legislators, to negotiate and try to get the biggest and strongest bill that we can with the most powerful support. We don't want a bill that we pass with no Republican support, and then we lose the House and Senate in 2022, and then they undo the whole thing. So if we have to use reconciliation and force it through on Democratic votes, we have to hold that in reserve. But the best case scenario, and I think a plausible one, is a 70 plus, maybe even 80 plus vote bill that is really big and that solves a lot of problems at once.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator. I'm glad to hear you talk about the reconciliation, because that's a fast track process. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rep. Carson, for the next question.
You're muted, Lauren.
Lauren, there you go.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my first question comes from Evan Zakatis of Portsmouth. And I think his question is really on everybody's mind to some extent. And he asks, how realistic and optimistic can we be that we can actually make a significant change to alter the course of climate change? In particularly, he makes reference to rising sea, the destruction of our ocean economy and fisheries due to the rising temperatures in Narragansett Bay. What do you think about that, Senator?
Yeah, I think we have no choice but to do it. And so we just have to presume that we can, because we must. There is no alternative where we say that's too hard, let's not try. We did that once in the last administration, and I regret it to my bones. So I think there's a real opportunity. As I mentioned, I think that the business community has gone from being AWOL on this issue to being powerfully engaged. And that makes a big difference to our Republican friends who get most of their support from corporate America. So corporate America beginning to show up really, really counts. I think John Kerry is the perfect person to connect the United States with the world community on this, so that in Glasgow in November, we can update the Paris Agreement to something that is much, much stronger. The Paris Agreement wasn't strong enough the day we signed it, but it was a good step forward. And now we have the chance to kind of close the deal on the promise of Paris, with the United States now finally at last showing some leadership and a lot of urgency from a lot of quadrants around the world. So we can still screw this up. But there's definitely a pathway to a very, very successful outcome. And it's new to have this pathway. It's new since the November election. So it's a big deal.
Thank you. Terri, you're up.
Yes, thanks. I just want to take 1 second, Senator, and let you know that we have, I think, 3 elected officials also on the call with us. We have newly elected Rep. Michelle McGaugh, who is abuts my district from District 71. I believe Susan Donovan is on the call from Bristol. And I believe we also have Portsmouth Town Council person Linda Yuzafuja on the
Yes,
call
we do.
tonight.
Hooray and welcome and congratulations. And Susan walked with me in Bristol, so she helped me get reelected.
Great. And so my question comes from Abby Brown of Portsmouth. And she asked, what do you think, how do you think the pandemic and the current climate that we're in affects our ability to move forward on, we have like two things happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Can we walk through them at the same time?
Yeah, I think we can, and I think in a strange way, it may actually open the door a little bit wider for us. The stuff we have to do to solve climate change is very, very big. And the big stuff that we have had to do to deal with the pandemic has opened the aperture of the possible in Congress. We know it's possible because we've done it now on the pandemic. Very, very big bills. The president's proposing $1.9 trillion in our third pandemic bill. So the aperture of what we're able to do is provably been opened wider as a result of this. And I think a lot of people who were who took the science versus science denial debate a little bit casually, like it was happening somewhere off in a box. Now, as a country, we have a really strong lived understanding of how badly things go haywire when you're not paying attention to the science. And so I think it's reinforced the importance of sticking with the science, doing what you know will work, and trying to steer away from imaginary, fantastic, political, phony arguments and positions. Now, obviously, there are going to be a lot of people who hold to that, but I think a large number of people have moved into taking the problem of science denial much, much, much more seriously. So both from an aperture point of view and from a risks of science denial point of view, I think we're in a better place.
Thank you. Deb, turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Senator, you've been a great advocate for biodiesel, and it's really a long-term solution to mitigate carbon in the heating and the transportation sector. And I see Bob here, Bob Morton from Newport Biodiesel on the call. We've worked together on some legislation here in Rhode Island, which we submitted last week, increasing the blend to 10% in home heating oil by 2023. This question comes from Roberta Fagan in Jamestown, and she wants to know if you see the reauthorization of the biodiesel tax credit, which is set to expire in December of 2022.
Yes, I do. We actually had pretty good success, our little merry band fighting in the omnibus bill for tax extenders on wind and solar, and particularly a 5-year extender on offshore wind to let it catch up because of the siting delays that offshore had compared to onshore wind. And again, that was fighting uphill against a Republican.
We
lost you there for a minute, Senator.
Senator, we've lost your sound.
Senator, we've lost your sound.
We can't hear you.
We've lost your sound, Senator.
Huh.
There you are.
Oh, there you are. You're
Okay.
back.
Okay.
This
the
is
short answer
broadband
is
issue
yes.
in Rhode Island, another conversation.
That's another conversation, exactly.
Sorry for
The
that.
short- I think
Thank
somebody
you,
muted
Senator.
me. The short answer is yes. And we also want EV and battery and storage infrastructure added to the extensions for wind and solar that we won in the omnibus.
Great. You know, another important industry in our state is the marine industry, and Mike Keyworth of Newport wants to know, how can the marine community help with the efforts to protect and improve the climate condition here in Rhode Island?
Well, I think the marine industry, Mike, as you know, wherever the land hits the sea, there's a marine industry. and it provides a great vehicle for reaching to our Republican colleagues in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Texas, and motivating their marine industries to give some real warnings about how serious this is. It's really hard to have a marina that isn't vulnerable to sea level rise. And for a lot of people, you know, it goes back to the street, and then it goes back to the other business across the street. They just can't go back endlessly as the sea levels rise. So, and ocean plastics, there are a whole bunch of oceans issues that I think we have a big, big opportunity on. And again, back to my days working in the Georgia election, it was really easy to talk to people who had marine businesses about the importance of all of this. The phrase blue economy really means something. And I think with Governor Raimondo as our new Secretary of Oceans and Commerce, that's my name for that job from here on, she's got a really big opportunity to really drill down on that blue economy. And Rhode Island's done some pretty good legwork in this area. We're not where we need to be yet, but we're along the path pretty well.
Great. Thank you, Senator. Rep. Carson?
Thanks, Deb. As you probably know, Senator, so much of the dollars that are being spent on the ground in Rhode Island municipalities is coming from the federal government. There's a whole series of grants and funding opportunities and programs that really are giving communities like Newport, like Portsmouth, like Middletown, the money they need to fortify the seawalls, to raise the wires so that in case of, to bury the wires electrically, so that in case of hurricanes, they're secured. What do you think, how can the communities on Aquidneck Island and Jamestown as well, and Bristol for Representative Donovan, what kinds of programs do you think they might be preparing for? What kinds of dollars do you think the federal government, what kind of projects do you think the feds will want to spend money on so that communities like Newport can begin lining up some projects to be shovel in the ground ready?
Yeah, I think infrastructure and planning are the two most likely opening bids. I think if we're going to do a big infrastructure bill, we're going to want to do a big coastal infrastructure piece to that. And we're going to want to make sure that municipalities have access to those resources. If you're a small municipality, CRMC's done a really good job with coastal flood mapping in Rhode Island. A lot of places that has not been done. So America is full of coastal municipalities, small towns that have a shore and they have no knowledge about what is coming. They can't trust the FEMA maps because FEMA has done a terrible job of mapping, and they don't have the resources to do the kind of thorough science that CRMC has done on their own, and they're kind of stuck. And at the same time, Moody's, if they have municipal bonds, are starting to bang on their door and say, hey guys, we're going to start rating your bonds based on your response to sea level risk. So tell me what you got there. And basically what they have there is empty pockets. So I think there's going to be a surge of concern from coastal municipalities. Most places, the most valuable property is near the shore. So when that starts to crash, then it really hurts the revenue base of the municipality. It's a really, really good question and something we really need to be focused on. And I think the two key things are planning, which means you need the information, and then starting to build the infrastructure to that plan, whether you're Providence trying to update the hurricane barrier, or New York trying to build your multi-billion-dollar wall around Manhattan. You've got to start planning and you've got to start building.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more, because the way the system I see it working is that a lot of the financial responsibility in Rhode Island is coming down to the municipalities for preparedness. And many times the small municipalities don't have the level of expertise that they need to really design and put a plan forward that's shovel in the ground ready. So that's something that I'm very interested in preparedness for the municipalities. So when the money becomes available, they'll be able to go in and apply for it.
Yeah. And bear in mind that it's Freddie Mac, the big national mortgage company, that has predicted a coastal property values crash from sea level rise and storm surges effect basically on the ability to get mortgages and insurance, and in turn on property values. So, that's not some greeny group. These are deadly serious people. Banks are hiring people to do proper mapping so they can assess the risk. This is an emerging area of very serious inquiry, and a couple of Rhode Islanders just wrote a really brilliant article on this in the professional magazine of the appraisers, National Appraisers Association, all about, folks, wake up, this is coming.
Well, the last time we met with Grover Fugate, who was the director of CRMC before he retired, he said that the banks are really looking 30 years out. You know, like a 30-year mortgage now is going to take you to a place where there could be serious flooding and inundation. And that's sort of the little window. So I would think in 10 years, looking out 30 years, then we're going to see some really serious decision making about those properties.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right, I have the next question. There have been discussions regarding the possibility of a national low carbon fuel standard similar to what is currently in place on the West Coast. What do you think the chances for such a program, and how would that interact with a carbon fee and a dividend program? And this question comes from Bob Morton of Middletown.
Yeah, who knows something about all of this. So it's a little early to tell right now. The doors have just opened to possibility in the Senate. Mitch McConnell is out as majority leader, and he was going to stop basically any serious climate legislation. Even if we could get 75 votes for a bill, he'd still stop it, because of the other 25 who he would want to not have put in a bad position, and because most of his big dark money donors are fossil fuel interests. So nobody was really engaged in this as thoroughly as they should have been, because they just didn't see a pathway. So Mitch is now out of the way. Chuck can bring a bill to the floor. That obstacle is clear. And now you've got the chamber, which is the biggest lobby group in the country by a factor of 3. And on occasion, it's been the biggest dark money election spender in elections, because it doesn't just lobby it, electioneers, and it shows up in regulatory proceedings and in litigation. I mean, they've been really a monster against me and others. And with their shift in position, we'll have to see how real it is and how much energy they put behind it, whether it's just a window dressing or something actually real. But I think the companies behind it got really burned by being caught as funders of big climate obstructors. And you change those two things, there's a gateway for a bill and the chamber wants one. And I think we've got a world of opportunities, and it's just too soon right now because we haven't done the legwork to decide what combination of fuel efficiency standards, renewable energy standards, carbon pricing, cap and trade, innovation investments, alternative fuel investments, how do we pull the pieces together? And that's all going to be happening, I think, this year. As soon as the Biden team starts organizing us, we're ready to roll.
Okay, thank you. I had a follow-up question, but you kind of already answered it, I think. Ted Hood from Newport wanted to know what you thought the chances are for a carbon tax, but I think you've kind of addressed that. So I'm comfortable.
Plus, I don't like calling it a carbon tax because first of all, that's the rhetoric that its opponents would want to use. It's a polluter pays fee is what it is. And if you charge it at the wellhead or at the mine mouth or at the port, then it's not being assessed against the consumer, it's being assessed against the corporation. And while economists will tell you that some of that cost will flow through to the consumer, I think a lot of it gets absorbed along the way through competition and pricing and so forth. So I think calling it a carbon fee or carbon pricing makes a lot more sense than calling it a carbon tax. And the failure to do that gives according to the International Monetary Fund, failing to do that gives the fossil fuel industry a $600 billion, that's with a B, billion-dollar effective subsidy every year just in the United States of America. So if you want to know why they flooded our politics with dirty money, if you're protecting a $600 billion per year subsidy, how much money can you put into politics to defend that?
Right, good point. Deb?
Thank you, Terry. I liked what you're saying. It's a polluter pay fee. It's kind of like rebranding this. That's great.
So did
So
that.
yeah, you talked a little bit about this, Senator, but specifically what role, and this is a question from Tom Dresser in Newport, your carbon fee, as you say, in the rebate bill, what role will it play now in the Biden administration? Do you have any kind of a timeline of how it will unfold? And what do you see as the biggest obstacles?
The Biden administration is still coming together. I go down tomorrow and I'm told we're going to vote on Secretary Yellen for Treasury.
Good one.
She answered a question of mine in the hearing very, very strongly about carbon pricing, that it's the necessity for addressing the climate crisis that we have, and that this is a top priority of hers, which is not something that we've heard from Treasury secretaries for a long ever. So that's a good sign. We'll also probably do Tony Blinken, the new Secretary of State. They have made international climate action a top priority of the department, and Kerry, working full time on it. So it's going to come together as the cabinet fills out and the Biden administration starts to organize how they want to proceed. But we're already having conversations in the Senate on strategy so that we're ready when the Biden administration has got itself stood up to be organized on our end and ready to move as quickly as we can. The big unknowns are, does corporate America at long last show up on climate in Congress after a lot of noise and signaling, but funding these rats at the Chamber of Commerce who've been my worst nemesis? If that flips in a big way, that speeds things up. And how many of the Republicans who I'm talking to quietly about climate change are willing to kind of come out of the woodwork and actually show up in the daylight and say, yes, I'll be for that? I think there are probably 3 or 4. The first 3 or 4 probably call out another 3 or 4. Then you got 6 or 7 or 8, and then maybe another 5 or 6 or 7 start showing up and knocking on the door saying maybe we're interested too. So I think it can grow pretty rapidly, but it's got to grow very. You guys do a lot of legislation. You sometimes have to kind of let things grow a bit organically when you're dealing with people who are still trying to figure out what their position is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Senator, I'm interested in this because President Biden has been talking a lot about civilian climate corps, much like the Depression era civilian conservation corps, modernizing water, transportation, roads, and energy that can withstand extreme weather impacts. Can you talk in terms of the economy and jobs, and if something like this goes forward, what it means to the average person? I get the policy with the administrators that you're talking about, and with a 50-50 Senate, as you talked about earlier, the budget reconciliation, this could be a great opportunity in the budget to implement because it's a simple majority. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think perhaps the best thing that President Biden has said about climate change is when my opponent thinks about climate change, he thinks hoax. And when I think about climate change, I think jobs. We have huge opportunities because the climate solutions are solutions in innovation, in infrastructure, in work that takes place here in America that we're the best at. And, there could be a wonderful economic boom. I expect there will be a wonderful economic boom coming out of the transition, but we'll miss out on that economic boom if we've let Europe and China do all the innovation and all the work because we haven't geared up for it. So gearing up for it is really important. And there is a lot of conversation, Deb, about the need for either a youth conservation corps or a American Conservation Corps or a city year type national service program of some kind that makes sure that as we pick ourselves up coming off of the economic woes the pandemic has caused, we're really reaching out to the communities that need the jobs the most. And then we're getting the work done in the areas that are most significant environmentally.
Yeah, it's kind of a parallel. It's tragic in a way what we went through during the Depression, but with COVID and this pandemic, so many families are just hurting, and any opportunity to get back on track and at the same time to work on, conservation and climate would really
Yeah.
be a win-win for the administration. So thank you for that, Senator.
Thanks, Deb. There was an editorial today in the Washington Post about speaking about how the public, how the American public, and how as we as a country can come to grips with climate change. And one of the things that it mentioned was something that you referenced, Senator, which was specific sectors of,
Yep.
of the economy. And I don't know how familiar you are with this, but we, as you know, 2 years ago had that horrendous gas shortage on Aquidneck Island, and people were in the cold for a week. Now, that was not due to a shortage of gas. I correct myself. That was human and mechanical error further up the pipelines. But in addition to that, National Grid has been working to build and design a 15 to 20-year gas and energy plan for Aquidneck Island. You may or may not know that they just have been surveying and sending out to municipalities, to the public. We as legislators responded. They had 4 or 5 solutions: pipelines, really doing a non-infrastructure solution, rebating homeowners and businesses for alternative heating sources and energy supplies for their homes and properties. You may not be familiar with that plan, but if I know that this heating and gas issue is going to heat up on Aquidneck Island. It's going to heat up. So what do you think the future is on that topic if we isolated the heating sector, and what are the possibilities for Aquidneck Island?
Well, throughout New England, we're heavily dependent on natural gas for winter heat. And as concerned as people are about climate change, nobody wants to shiver through a winter. So we're going to have to deal with that in a very responsible way. I think that there's going to be a combination of things that emerge in the years ahead, and it'll depend to a certain degree what we can get done in Congress. But to the extent that hydrogen becomes a fuel that can replace fossil fuel, that's a lane that needs to be explored. To the extent that electric coming off of our offshore wind can replace natural gas fired heating, that's a lane that needs to be explored. To the extent that we need to do direct air capture and make sure that if you're selling natural gas to the public, you are for sure, real deal, actually removing the carbon that results as part of the mechanics of all that. That's a lane that needs to be explored. And I think it'll be a little bit different depending on your site, your location, what the infrastructure is, and so forth. But I applaud National Grid for starting to look ahead in this way. And I've got to say, there's some pretty backward-looking utility companies who need a real kick in the rear end. But National Grid has been thoughtful and attentive and is, I would say, in the top quartile of American utilities in trying to be helpful.
Yes, well, the three of us, Deb, Terri, and I think Susan as well, we were briefed this week by National Grid as the results of their survey, and they are on National Grid's website if anyone on Aquidneck Island wants to see it. They did get responses from the public, from all 3 town councils, from all the legislators on the island, and we responded to their options. And largely by about 60%, the non-new pipeline strategy was the one that was most recognized as the way to go. We've had wind off of Block Island, and so we were able to make that a prototype for alternative energy. So I think we're advocates for decarbonizing Aquidneck Island and making it some kind of a prototype for some kind of alternative heating system to really begin easing off gas. So for the Aquidneck
And I got to
Island,
believe that Elon Musk's $100 million prize for decarbonization technologies is going to encourage some pretty interesting thinking about that problem.
yeah, I think we should decarbonize Aquidneck Island, but that's a discussion for another day. Thank you for that.
Okay, I have the next question. This comes from Jennifer G. of Newport, and she talks about her 11-year-old son who is very concerned about the climate crisis. And he would like to know what you see as Rhode Island's biggest challenge in improving our environmental outlook.
Rhode Island, I think, actually has a lot to be proud of. If you go back to John Chafee, my predecessor, several back, when when he was the chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee, he held the first hearing on climate change in the Senate. And, you know, through Save the Bay and Clean Water Action and a lot of other great organizations, Rhode Island has always been leaning in on climate and environmental issues. The cleaning up of the Bay, I don't think there's ever been an investment like we did through the Bay Commission to make sure that all of the sewage was treated. And, you know, we love our state. It's precious and we really want to take good care of it. So I think we're doing very, very well. I think more offshore wind will help us meet our goals. I think more EV infrastructure will help us make our goals. And then because we have so much non-owner occupied housing and a very significant low-income population, we need to solve that bedeviling problem of getting solar onto buildings, residential solar onto buildings where the landlord doesn't want to put it on because the tenant is paying the utility bill, and the tenant doesn't want to put it on because it's not his or her house. So why should they make a capital investment in it? And so we get stuck in that economic trap. And part of what I hope to do in the infrastructure bill is to figure out a way to at least make Rhode Island a template for how to solve that problem.
Great.
But I think if, you know, when we're driving electric vehicles and we've got residential solar all over the place and the offshore wind vanes are twirling, and I think we can do this right. But thank goodness for his generation, because I think a lot of what's happening, particularly to my Republican colleagues, is the consciences of their children are being grafted onto them in some degrees rather unwillingly, but they have no choice because their children aren't letting up on them.
Thank God for those kids, right?
Yeah.
The
that's
younger
right.
generation.
A
The
follow-up
Greta
question.
generation. We went from the greatest generation to the Greta generation.
So a follow-up question to do with the youth of the state of Rhode Island. This comes from Janine Silversmith, who I've been working with on to bring climate education into our classrooms. What on the federal level, how can you help us to elevate climate literacy? And how does that, you know, in your view, work to help us in the fight of climate change?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because the federal government has never really gotten involved in curriculum. We may put very broad curriculum demands out there in return for certain federal funding, but we have never been all that specific about it. I think we're probably best off trying to make sure that we really are focused in a positive way on the science and supporting STEM education so that people have a grounding to understand when they're being told stuff that is not only not true, but not possible to be true. And then I think we have to do a way, way, way better job of calling out the science denial and climate denial apparatus that has been operating for more than a decade now and has been pumping just spectacular lies out into the public domain. And my favorite target there is going to be the Heartland Institute, which is a phony front group stood up by the fossil fuel industry that's about as awful as it can be. They put up billboards by the road comparing climate scientists to the Unabomber. I mean, they're just really loathsome. And one of their stunts was to mail 200,000 fake science textbooks to school teachers around the country that were basically science denial climate textbooks. And I want to find out who paid for that, because just mailing 200,000 books costs a lot of money, let alone all the legwork to get them printed and written and get the addresses pulled. I mean, that's an expensive project. Some rascal paid for that, and I want to know who that is.
Senator, I get that the federal government's not in the curriculum business, and that's great work that Rep. Cortvriend is doing here in Rhode Island. But what about the federal government getting involved in innovation? You know, we have a lot of entrepreneurs and business people who care so deeply about a corporate social responsibility.
Yep.
Is there any connection between entrepreneurs and federal government leaders happening in Washington, D.C. that you can share with us?
Yes, huge. And I think Gina coming in at Commerce is going to be at the epicenter of that conversation. So that's going to be a really important place for us to play the Rhode Island card with the incoming Secretary of Oceans and Commerce. She oversees EDA, which, as you know, on Aquidneck Island has just done wonderful work with the composites industry to set up with the Navy the new Composites Innovation Center out at the old Hodges Badge building.
Sure.
And there's, you know, a lot more that can be done on innovation in this space. And Rhode Island, particularly through composites, which are very fuel efficient because of the lightness and strength they provide in, you know, vehicles and so forth, infrastructure, is just one area where we have a really significant future. I think another is going to be the experts at URI, GSO, and Brown on ocean science and what we can learn and how we can innovate to improve the ability of our oceans to regulate their own temperature better and capture carbon dioxide more effectively and naturally, for instance, through mangrove, not necessarily through salting the entire ocean with iron ore. That those I'm not a fan of the mechanical manipulations, but I do think that there's a lot of innovation that we can do along the shoreline.
And
Thank you.
Commerce Secretary also has oversight over the weather too, doesn't she?
Yep.
Once confirmed, so maybe she can do
Yep.
something.
With any luck,
around
she'll
there as
be able.
well.
She won't be fixing it with a Sharpie.
Right. Thank
I'm
you.
going to switch subjects, but stay on the ocean a little bit. Where do we stand on all those offshore drilling proposals that were out there 3 and 4 years ago? I know they were a huge shock to Rhode Islanders and a huge shock to people on Aquidneck Island. And I know Senator Hoyer and I had a bill in on that a couple of years ago, and it was very complicated interacting with the feds on how to write that kind of legislation. Where's that all at today, Senator?
Dead as can be. The fossil fuel industry is going to want to protect what it has in the Gulf. But back under President Obama, when the less than wise decision was made to allow drilling exploration off the Atlantic coast, even the red states went berserk along the coasts.
Yeah.
And that wonderful little advocacy group, Oceana, ran their resolution revolution that went from St. Augustine all the way up to Norfolk, Virginia. And I think they got every single coastal county through all those red states to pass resolutions against offshore drilling. And they never even tried north of Maryland. Maryland was kind of the stop line. And the stuff has completely fallen apart south of Maryland, to the point where even Trump knew it was such a stupid idea that he protected Florida, the Atlantic coast of Florida, from it at the request of their governor, so they could do a phony baloney press conference and pretend they cared about the oceans.
I remember that. I remember
Yeah.
that. That's good news. I
So-
remember everyone in Rhode Island was really somewhat horrified about the
Consider
possibility.
that dead. The fossil fuel industry can't even sell the junk that it has right now. The idea that they need to go out and drill for new stuff, drill in the Arctic, drill offshore, their shareholders should rise up in fury if they try something that stupid.
Well, while you're on that, what's up in the Arctic? I mean, I sort of see it. I pay a little attention to it. I mean, I know, and when you answer the question, please speak to the fact that there's so much melting up there going on, you know?
Yeah. Well, on the drilling, Trump tried to pack through in a big rush a lot of offshore drilling leases, and no companies showed up to bid. So the state of Alaska itself was the only bidder to try to hold them for companies that might be interested later. But I don't think they're going to show up for the reasons that I said. I don't think they can sell what they've got, let alone drill for new. And it's expensive. The transport and all that are very difficult. Plus, you're volunteering as worst company in the world when you say you're going to go drill in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge? Why take that on when there's no money at the end of the day? It is getting really serious up in our Arctic and Antarctic areas, because of that's where the climate effect is the most profound. And there's the danger of these terrible feedback loops coming out of frozen methane as the tundra thaws. And you see these pictures, if you go to the YouTube, you see these terrible pictures of lakes bubbling in Siberia and up in Canada, where frozen methane is melting and turning into a gas and bubbling up through the lakes. So if you're looking for a place where the meter is already in the red zone, warning us to take this seriously, the Arctic and the Antarctic are the
I agree with you.
are the worst. That and our reefs.
I agree with you. You're absolutely right.
Scary. Yeah. I have, it looks like we have time for maybe one or two more questions. This one got emailed to me this afternoon from Stuart Ross, and we touched on it a little bit with Governor Raimondo being nominated to Commerce, hopefully successfully. She'll be the Commerce Secretary. How would you advise her? What kind of person would you ask her to look for as the next administrator of NOAA?
Well, I think you need to make sure that the NOAA administrator has a extremely credible science background. And I think you also need to make sure that the link between NOAA, the administrator's office, and the secretary's office is really robust. When I've spoken to Gina about this, I've urged her to have a full-time oceans person reporting directly to her, coming into her office every day, not being off in NOAA, just to make sure that all these policy issues get the primacy, frankly, that they deserve. And we have so much work to do on oceans right now. They've been so overlooked for so long. I mean, it's understandable as a terrestrial species, we pay more attention to the land-based effects, but the ocean effects are actually really ominous. We're warming. If we had to recreate the warming of our oceans with nuclear bombs, setting them off down in the middle of the bottom of the ocean to generate heat, we'd have to do several per second. So think about that as a measure of how rapidly our oceans are warming. The acidification we've never seen in the life of our species. You've got to go back into geologic time, and it's really hard to undo acidification. Species kind of depend on it, and a lot of the core species, the bottom of the food chain, the little sea snails and things like that that are out in the ocean that are the base of the oceanic food chain, are highly vulnerable to the acidification. So it's really spooky, and it's been given too little attention. And I think, frankly, one of the reasons that Gina was willing to leave, I don't think she was that comfortable leaving in the middle of a pandemic, but I think she believes, and I encouraged her, that what she can do from the ocean state, knowing what she knows, to make oceans a priority like they have never been before, she'll be able to look back with real pride on what she will have accomplished if she focuses on that priority.
Well, we certainly stand in a very interesting place right now. And I think we're all very giddy about a new administration, the opportunity for Governor Raimondo, and certainly your work, Senator Whitehouse. We have just a few minutes left. Could you kind of give us some closing remarks on what you think some of the high points are that we can take away tonight?
I'd go back to, where I started. When I was elected, when you were all wonderful enough to elect me in 2006, I got sworn in January of 2007. And all through 2007, 2008, and 2009, climate change was really bipartisan. You had bill after bill in the Senate, and you had Republican support, and it all stopped dead with Citizens United, literally the day that Citizens United was decided. So we have the power politically to undo the political damage that the fossil fuel industry caused. And frankly, it's starting to blow up in their face a little bit. So it's been my joy over the last decade to try to blow it up in their face as much as I can. But that really is turning. And when we break that blockade, the opportunities are immense. So think big, think bold, think urgent, and let's all pull this through together.
Thank you. Wonderful. To thank my colleagues and everyone who's joined us tonight. Rep. Carson, Rep.
Yes.
Cortvriend.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really, the turnout tonight exceeded what we thought. We're really thrilled to see our friends and neighbors on this call. I think it just tells me again how climate and climate resiliency is so important to Rhode Islanders and so important to the island that we live on, Terri and I, in Jamestown, where Deb lives. There's no doubt about that. We have more coming. The Climate Caucus is going to continue to do forums like this throughout the next 6 months. You know, we need your voices. We want to also share with our voters and our friends the bills that are in the Rhode Island State House so that you can see what we're working on and advocate for them if you believe in them, and really have a voice from this part of Rhode Island on resiliency and sustainability. So that's our goal here. And we really appreciate the senator coming on and helping us
I
have a very
appreciate being able to
successful
join.
meeting.
They're great advocates on the call and great friends and great environmentalists. I see a lot of wonderful familiar faces.
Me
So
too. Me
thank you,
too.
Pretty
thank you.
blessed.
Without a
And
doubt.
Sue Taylor, I see also, I don't know if she got recognized.
Oh,
as
I'm
an election.
sorry.
There's Sue.
Right.
Yes,
Yes.
there's a lot of friends on the call. There's also Sandra Flowers from our school committee. There's a lot of folks on the call. So thank you
all
very
in the
much,
community for
Senator.
what you do. We can't do it without you. And thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Have a good
everyone.
night.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all for coming.
Onward.